Hey, folks! Thanks for tuning in to our Owen Stream-a-thon Comics and Supers Roundtable with a cast of thousands here on the podcast. Starting at the top, I'm Mike Lafferty. I am the host. Directly beneath me, only figuratively, is Bear, the Gen X GM from the Great. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, man, and I couldn't be beneath you. I'm in Canada, so I'm your hat, remember?
You are my hat. And Bear is the guy behind the Heroic RPG, which you may be aware of. Directly below Bear is Jacob Blackman, who is doing a drawing for us of Owen. What was the picture we're drawing?
Owen Skyrocket.
Owen Skyrocket. Okay. And one lucky commenter will receive this picture. So let's sound off the comments. Let us know you're here. Right below Jacob, we have Leonard Pimental, who is the guy behind Prowlers and Paragons. Len, how you doing?
Living the dream, baby. Living the dream.
Thanks for making it. I appreciate having you here. Directly below Len is Alex Thomas, the current line developer for Mutants and Masterminds. How are you, sir?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining. And Nathan Berg in the comments. Thanks for saying hi, buddy. And Square Peg Makes Games also kind of chimed in, so good to see you as well. Directly below Alex is the man of the hour, Owen Casey Stevens. How you doing, Owen?
Hi, folks. I'm exhausted, but that's mostly because we're moving into our new house this week. So, hence clutter all behind me.
That is always a good time, isn't it?
It's been interesting. The most recent confusion is we had some electrical work done, and the electricians disconnected all power to our gaming room. So, hopefully that'll get all fixed, tomorrow morning.
Well, gaming by candlelight sounds like fun, though.
I've actually done that. We had some power outages here in Oklahoma a few years ago, and at one point we were bored out of our skull. One of our friends came over and ran a game by candlelight, specifically a very low-tech game where we were seeking fire. So it was thematic.
That works. Thanks to everybody in the comments for sounding off. And last, but certainly not least, Mr. Steve Kenson, the guy behind both Mutants and Masterminds and Icons. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, Mike. As to quote the Underminer, I may be beneath you, but there is nothing beneath me.
Oh, Steve. All right. I like that energy. We are here today to encourage people to go to Owen's GoFundMe page and help him with his medical funding. And because it's easier to say on the air, I made a tiny URL for it that you will find scrolling here at the bottom, tinyurl.com/OwenFunds. Please go give generously. Owen's a great guy. He needs your help. So I will be doing the PBS telethon thing, and periodically throughout the show, be saying, "Hey, folks, you should go do this." Did we lose? What happened?
Oh, I don't know. StreamYard decided to kick me out, and then you just don't pay attention to private chat now, do you, Mike?
No. Well, Steve, your quote's no longer accurate. Someone is now beneath you.
I know, right?
I am beneath you all. I am the Lord of Mantle.
So hey,
Meyer can't catch a break.
Right. So true.
well,
Someone's breathing into their mic, by the way, guys. Be careful with the headsets if you're not breathing in, because it's making a huge every time you breathe. Sorry to be that guy, but I'll be that guy.
That guy can be a useful function.
Sure. I will.
I am not useful. You take that back. I am useless, sir, and I am proud of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
let's talk inspiration, since everyone on here has created a well-known superhero RPG.
I haven't.
You haven't, that's right. Well, Steve Kenson.
Yes, sir.
When you were creating icons and mutants and masterminds, what did you think were your most important inspirations?
Well, they differed so far as that went. So my most important inspiration for Mutants and Masterminds was to get Freedom City published. Mm-hmm. And that was my key motivation. My second biggest motivation was that I needed to use the D20 SRD to make a superhero game, because that was the those were the specifics of my contract by which I was getting Freedom City published. So I was motivated to take the D20 system and turn it into a superhero RPG as best I could. With icons, it was different. But sorry, you had a question.
Not really. I was just actually inspiration. It was like, well, there was a contract.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say it, but when people ask me inspiration on a lot of my writing projects, it was somebody offered to pay me, and so therefore I got down to being inspired.
Okay.
How Faustian of you, sir.
Right.
I have more than once told people, "Hey, how do you overcome writer's block?" And I say, "I look at the mortgage payment."
Right.
That may not be the best source of inspiration, but I think it is fair to say that being able to write, to contract, to order, to spec is a useful skill if you want to be a professional RPG designer who works for other companies. And not everyone wants to do that, right? There are other ways to be RPG creators, absolutely. But if you talk to people that you see freelancing a lot, I think a bunch of them are going to be able to, especially if they freelance for different projects, different companies, a bunch of them are going to be able to say, what inspired you? Money. It seems better than asking people if they wanted fries or something.
Yeah.
All right, so I had a whole line of questioning about. So, what was your inspiration, movies or comic books? And it comes down to filthy lucre. So,
well, honestly, as far as superhero RPGs go, much more comic books than movies. Also, keeping in mind that when I designed Mutants and Masterminds, comic book movies were a whole different thing. This was like 2001, 2002. This is pre, Marvel Cinematic Universe, pre even like the Sony Spider-Man movies. So it was a whole different world when it came to superhero media.
You had X-Men and then Batman and then what? Steel?
Yeah, like.
Man, you guys are mean.
well,
Why you got to talk crap against Steel? He's just a working man out there trying to make his way. I mean,
right?
He is the freelance superhero.
You know what? I watched that movie. And I can't quite say I regret it, but I can say I've only ever watched it once, and it may be one of the very few superhero movies I only watched once.
Have you guys?
Well, technically, you've earned your grievance. You've watched it. I haven't. So,
legit.
By that time, both Christopher Reeve's Superman franchise and the Batman franchise had been completed.
Yes, indeed.
And both Salinger and what's his name as Captain America.
Yeah.
Trust Chesthard or Big McLarchuge. What the hell was that guy's name? Reb Brown.
Yeah.
Someone just said Shaq was good as Steel. I got to say, Shaq was not the problem with that movie.
It's fair.
I think Shaq did everything that could be done with the material he was given. But one of the differences at the time was that those things tended to focus on a single house of heroes, if you will. So, you had Batman and then Robin and then Batgirl, but you tended not to have Superman in Batman movies, right? We had not had the Avengers movie. No one had mostly dared cross the stream. Some of the few examples are things like Thor and Daredevil, or at least versions of Thor and Daredevil, showing up in Hulk TV movies, and those were exciting big deals for geeks at the time.
Yeah,
or at least one class of geeks. I won't say everyone was excited, but
I gotta say I enjoyed seeing Hulk juggle with that Viking-looking guy wearing his fuzzy, shoulder pieces. That was that was a moment.
Let's not forget the Corman Fantastic Four. That was pretty something. Or that Justice League pilot episode.
Oh, with Winchester from MASH as a
as Martian Manhunter.
David Ogdensteyer says the Martian Manhunter who clearly found all the Oreos.
Was Hulk Hogan in a superhero type movie? I mean, knowing Hogan's career, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, but could be.
Unless you count that one where he fought Zeus.
Yeah. Alex, you got to save us. We're devolving into pop culture discussion. Please. Back to
It's all before my time. I'm just absorbing.
Burn.
Alex, are you the millennial on the podcast?
I am.
You are? Okay.
I am. I'm the one whose retirement plan is the apocalypse.
Oh, no, that's all of our retirement plan. Make no mistake.
Gen X was there first. Quit trying to steal our thunder.
None of us have, spare property we can rent out. We're not boomers here.
Exactly.
But Alex, you're the current line developer for Mutants and Masterminds. You already have the gig. So what is your inspiration going forward with M&M products and ideas?
Well, that is much like Steve said. I enjoy being paid in this time that we live in. But more generally, I really want to see M&M move into its space as the top superhero RPG in the industry. I mean, we've been around the longest. I really want us to innovate and become something that is accessible to lots of people who want to tell superhero stories, either ripped from comic books or movies or TV shows. I've been really enjoying our discussions about the future of M&M, especially with our new Valiant game coming out. And yeah, a lot of the other good things that are coming down the pipe.
Is Hero not putting out new products anymore?
They still releasing things on their web store, to my knowledge, but I don't know how many of those are in print.
I think it's kind of a GURPS sort of release model over there now.
I believe that's right.
The Mutants and Masterminds is in fact probably the oldest of the popular, well-known, currently having new print products RPGs. But as much as I love M&M and my Green Ronin fellows, I certainly remember playing Champions and Villains and Vigilantes and
Indeed.
There's another one that's just on the tip of my tongue from Marvel, of course.
Marvel superheroes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I missed out on Champions, unfortunately. Actually, I only recently discovered the joy of rolling a million D6s when I started playing Warhammer.
Warhammer.
It's true that we were the sort of Champions players that had to have rules like your character may not have an attack with more dice than you can hold in two hands.
Right.
Which my current housemate simply bought himself little tiny D6s, so that physical rules were.
Before you said little D6s, I thought you were going to say like Hulk hands to roll more dice.
Either way.
Why not both?
Hey, Bear, the Gen X demon.
I'm down here behind the banner. Hi. I'm down.
Hi. He's down there.
Send me pizza and chocolate, please.
I know you had some very specific inspirations for Heroic. Can you talk about those and how you tried to...
Well, yeah. My biggest inspiration is Captain Geach and the Shrimp Shack Shooters, but that's a reference. If you get it, you're a nerd. If you don't, oh well. Yeah, no, dude, look.
Nerds there, but
You've never seen that thing you do? Oh, Mike, you're missing out. No, look, Phase Rip, obviously, Marvel Superheroes is the biggest one. Jeff Grubb and Steve Winter and all those guys. Those are the shoulders. Those are the giants whose shoulders on which I stand with Heroic. But from comic books, it's always going to be Claremont and Byrne and Wolfman and Perez. They just wrote the kind of comics I loved when I was that age, and that's what Heroic and the Zenith Universe are all about. They're about that Bronze Age time capsule, that piece of amber where superheroes could still be heroes, but have real stories without having to be deconstructed into whatever the hell Garth Ennis turns superheroes into. So, that's where my inspiration comes on that for sure.
As a fellow Gen Xer, I too got my start in comics during the Bronze Age, so respect. Yeah, I mean, I have very, very fond recollections of the very end of the 70s, basically the first half of the 80s, especially comics.
Yeah,
which is when I started reading them.
Oh, absolutely. It's never mind. My sidekick's a junkie. Never mind that. Everything up until Crisis is just it's weapons grade awesome, and then after Crisis, everybody wanted to treat superheroes like a real thing, and it just degenerated into what we colloquially call the Iron Age, where Image took off and Alan Moore just destroyed superheroes, and Batman became the darkest thing on two legs, and we never recovered. We've never recovered. They tried. Busiek and Perez tried with their Avengers and their Thunderbolts to get it back on course, but the audience wasn't having it. They want, I've met too many people. I work in the film industry mostly, or I had, and I met far too many people who out of their mouth would come this, why doesn't Batman just carry a shotgun? Have you read a fucking Batman comic, man?
Right.
Come on, but that's the way their brains
work.
There you go.
And for me, the answer has always been Batman does carry a shotgun. We just call him the Punisher when he does that. It's a different character, right?
Yeah.
I always felt like I enjoyed, for example, The Dark Knight, the specific The Dark Knight comics. For me, the mistake that got made was that The Dark Knight was interesting and popular because it did something new and
unusual.
Interesting. And the takeaway people took was that it was popular because it was dark and had jokes like rubber bullets honest.
Right.
Well, these are the same people who don't understand. While Alan Moore wrote Watchmen, he also wrote Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
Right. Exactly.
Which is one of the most silver agey, bronze agey, feel good comics you're ever going to read in your life. People just dark sells.
It's also like Owen says. The takeaway was this was popular, so therefore we must do more of it. Yeah. Not because it was popular, because it was a unusual change of pace, rather than the same thing that everyone was seeing all the time. But once it became the same thing everyone was seeing all the time, not as popular.
Yeah, well, it led to the 90s comics implosion, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. When you're dealing with comic publishers, you're dealing with the same adult mentality brain as film producers. And all they care about is how much money they can make. They don't care about anything else.
Yeah.
Although
it is interesting to see, from at least a reader's perspective, both in games and comics, the generational shifts that come in where you can see your contemporaries, basically coming into comics and being like, I want to, or games, and being like, I want to fix all the things that I think are wrong with this genre, and make it like the stuff that I got started on that I loved. You get the old school Renaissance movement in gaming. You get, the current, a lot of, the current generation of comics authors and creators who are like, I want it to be more like the comics that I grew up on. And some of those are like the Bronze Age sort of stuff. Some of it's not. I mean, some of the new comics creators are like, I got started reading comics in the 90s.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree on that a little bit. A lot of the guys who are writing these days, I find, and girls, and people who are writing these days, have a tremendous amount of self-insertism going on, and it's really not doing anything good for comics. When you're writing Batman, please write Batman. Don't write you as Batman. You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a weird thing that they love to do these days.
Well, and that's the genre has gotten so self-referential at this point.
Sorry, I was holding you all up for a second there. Thanks,
Meta.
Mike.
I don't think it's just this particular genre. I don't think it's just RPGs. At the risk of, in fact, not at the risk of, I absolutely do not want us to collapse into a larger conversation about media in general. However, it does appear that there is a lot out there that is currently people attempting to cash in on the original product of geniuses. And it's real difficult to cash in on it's easy to try to cash in on the real product of geniuses, but the end result is a lot of mediocre output, whether you're in whatever medium you're talking about. So, for example, and let's hit what I hope is a safe example. Watchmen was absolutely terrific. Everyone else suddenly, as Bear touched on, thought, hey, deconstruction of supers, that's the way to go. And the problem is deconstruction of supers is excellent when you have something to say. I dare you to have something to say after Watchmen. And that's been out for a little while.
Mhm.
And the idea of, well, it would be crazy if this were real. Okay, that's sit down. I appreciate it. Yes, it would be, but that's not. Or it'd be dangerous if somebody had powers like Superman. That's horrible. Yes, but those of us who like comics already are kind of aware of that. Where we left that exit on the highway already. So I think that's the trick we find in comic books, but it seems to exist out there in media in general right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, one of the best stories ever for Superman was John Byrne was at a convention. May have been San Diego Comic-Con. I don't know. And somebody said, actually, why doesn't Lex Luthor just have a bullet made out of kryptonite and then get the greatest marksman in the world to shoot Superman while he's accepting an award or something? And Byrne went, you know what? It's a really good point, and clearly you've put a whole lot of thought into this, but we need to sell comic books. So killing off our cash cow would be a really dumb
Would be
idea.
kind of stupid. Yeah.
And then 5 years later, they killed him off.
Are you suggesting that killing Superman would be a dumb idea?
Well, he was right after Crisis.
I do want to push back. I want to push back a little bit on the statement that these are things that we fans of comic books are already aware of. We 30, 40, and 50-year-old fans of comics are already aware of a lot of this. But of course, there are new people coming in all the time, and it's not necessarily easily accessible to find what we consider to be, say, the golden age of the Bronze Age comics, right? So I think there is a place to say, hey, certain kinds of stories are worth telling, let's say, every decade. And I say certain kinds of stories. That doesn't mean we have to tell the exact same story every decade. I do think there's
Ultimate Comics. If you can't retell all the stories, Ultimate Comics, right?
And that I completely agree with you there. This is not a case of precluding the story from ever being told again, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's only 7 stories to start with or something. And if you really get even more reductionist, there's only 2. So
and they all have a Jean Grey dying and being reborn. That's the worst thing.
I was about to say, so you've got Jean against nature, you've got Jean against Scott,
Yep.
you've got Jean against the
Jean against death, Jean against the universe.
But
Jean against Emma.
Yeah. I think the trick is that these great pieces of work that really move the direction of the genre as a whole, for example, Watchmen, for example, The Dark Knight, the problem with them is that they are unique pieces of work. They are sufficiently unique that they literally move the genre in a certain direction. And that gets tough because it's inevitable that the larger genre becomes somewhat just a process of imitating some element of those watershed products.
Yeah, but at the same time, you'll also get Kingdom Come and the Golden Age and New Frontier and Marvels. You'll get stuff out of it because that ice was broken and those bold steps were taken. The problem is when your monthly Spider-Man comic tries to be Watchmen, or your monthly Action Comics tries to be, Crisis on Infinite Earths or Dark Knight Returns or whatever. That's where the breakdown happens, and I agree with you that 100%. But you need those watershed moments to move the needle on the art a little bit forward. Otherwise, we'd still be telling Kurt Swan Superman stories.
Oh, 100%. And it's exactly what you're saying. You need, the problem is when everyone tries to do it in order to move comic books.
Well, it's my friend Adam Jury, tells the story about how a very helpful fellow at a convention, explained to him the secret of success in the industry was that if they would just produce only best-selling books, they would have a runaway success with their company. And Adam was like, why didn't we think of that?
Seriously?
That's the problem with watershed projects of genius, is that you can't predict or replicate them. They're unique products of genius.
You can't produce that.
Come along when they come along, and at best, what you can do is try to create a fertile and risk-taking environment that's going to allow some of them to come to the fore. But you can't just say, yes, we are just going to produce genius books from now on. You know,
Well, that's it. I'm renaming my company from Zenith Comics to Genius Books.
right?
No, but it's also the film industry has this problem, right?
Yeah,
Which is-
absolutely.
yeah,
All
of
creative
course.
industries do.
it's the idiocy of the producer, or in comics, the idiocy of the editor. They're not like the old school editors. Perfect example of this is Earth X. Now, we've all read Earth X, right?
Uh-huh.
It's a great book. Why were the rest of them condensed down to small numbers of books and they weren't allowed to tell the full story and they had to rush it all? Because editors get involved and editors have ideas and publishers have ideas and they have thoughts, forgetting that they're just the money and they need to and let the creators create and hire good editors that can keep the creators on track like they used to in the old days. They don't do that. They act like film producers. They walk around and they swing their dick and they say, I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm the money and you have to do what I say. And as a result, many good ideas die on the vine, and many bad ideas get 13 reboot series like bloody Captain Marvel. How many times does she get a new reboot? You know what I mean? Like, at what point, after 10 issues, 3 or 4 times, you go, this character's not clicking. Maybe we need to take a break. You know what I mean? They don't know how to do that because they just want money. And now that they're tying it all into the movies, it's even worse because now they're getting that Hollywood attitude, and it's a horrible attitude.
I distinctly remember when I was working at Wizards of the Coast on the Star Wars role-playing game line, at one point, not long before I was laid off, so perhaps I should have seen this coming, one of the, I'll say, C-suite people told me, oh, yeah, you work on our Star Wars game line. Well, your job doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good a job you do. It doesn't matter how good these books are. It doesn't matter how much effort you put into it. All that matters is, does the cover look good? And how much money did the last Star Wars movie make? And beyond that, everything you do could be replaced by monkeys. And money-wise, he might have been right. There certainly is a place in the industry for people that have money and are good at managing money, because creators often aren't, not universally, but often aren't. And ideally, yes, those people would say, hey, I am good with money. You are good with story. Let me put money behind story and otherwise get out of the way. I don't know if that's realistic, and I'm not sure if it was ever realistic, but the money being there does mean that we've got the shot at people producing useful, interesting, good stories. The other thing that I've been wanting to say for a bit, and I wanted to codify it, one of the reasons that I think Kingdom Come and Dark Knight and Watchmen all kind of work is that none of them were designed to last forever.
Yeah.
Those were all specific stories where they said, I've got this whole story arc, and that whole story arc is awesome. And some story arcs should not be translated to a monthly comic where you expect that story arc to go on forever and or to deal with all the consequences of that story arc. And yes, sometimes someone has a good idea for a sequel. Weirdly, I think the best sequel to Watchmen was the HBO television series.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed that, actually.
Indeed.
Which I thought did a really good job saying, hey, if this universe had existed, what might be a story we could tell later? That is very different from trying to say, hey, we're going to do a Watchmen comic and we're going to have, one will be the Watchmen, even though that's not the name of the group, it's just the comic. And one will be Rorschach, because doesn't everyone love Rorschach? And one will be Night Owl because he has a dirigible. If you tried to do that for 3 years, I think you would get a mess.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so 10 years ago, right before manga hit like a hammer, there was an article written, I think it was like in the waning days of Wizard magazine, or it might have been on CBR.com. I can't remember. It was some professional industry who said the only way to save Western American superhero comics is to adapt the Japanese model of releasing 5 volumes a year. Or 4 volumes a year, depending on what it is. And having it be a big book full of one story, and then next one will pick up and carry on from there. The monthly model must die. And everybody in the comic book industry went, no, la, 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 la. And now manga is here, and Marvel and DC are here by comparison. And then everybody else who's fighting for the remainder of the market is underneath them. And it's insane. It's absolutely, they shoot themselves in their own foot because of corporate behavior. And as a result, they have to make money. They got to justify this. Was it called corporate responsibility? The thing where they have to make sure they produce money for their investors?
Fiduciary responsibility.
Value for the shareholders.
Yeah. So as a result, as long as they're printing and people are buying, they don't, like exactly what you said, Owen, they don't give a shit about the quality. books that are considered bestsellers today from Marvel and DC would have been canceled in the 90s for lack of sales.
That's true for so many print products, right? I remember looking at a Dragon magazine from the 80s, which had a little tiny scroll talking about its print numbers, and its print numbers were like 100,000 copies.
Yep.
Well, yeah, you can do a book and pay people and take some creative risks when you're selling 100,000 copies.
Sure.
There are entire game companies nowadays that survive on numbers that in the 80s would have been laughed at. 2,000 copies, 2,000 print copies of a book is a pretty good run now.
These days, yeah.
And that was not the case when I got into the industry.
Sure. And some of that has changed in the medium. I mean, back in the heyday of comics in the 1940s, Top Comics routinely sold 1 million copies. Comics like the original Captain Marvel, sold more than any comic these days could even imagine.
Well, I understand that movies have been a little popular too. I mean,
Well, no, but they fucked that up. They fucked that up in a big way, because what happened was Joe Bob Nobody from Missouri went to see the Avengers movie and went, God dang, I sure like that Iron Man. He's funny, and Captain America, that's America's ass. Yeah, I want to go read that comic book. Walked into the store and picked it up and was like, who the fuck are these characters?
Yeah,
These are the guys I saw in the movie.
I don't even think that happens, honestly. I think that people's reaction to seeing a good superhero movie is, man, I'd like to see another good superhero movie.
That's what I think too.
I want to go and read a comic book.
There was a lot of anecdotal comic book store guys saying that they heard that a lot from new people coming in going, why aren't these the characters I just saw in the movie? So it's possible it happened. I don't know.
I don't know, but I have a feeling once the movie started making money, and I may be completely off by this, but I suspect that once the movie started making real money, the very nature of the comic books and what they were doing and what they were for changed.
Yes.
There's a phenomenal cartoon, Avengers. Oh my
Earth's
God.
Mightiest Heroes.
Earth's Mightiest Heroes, where they're all pointing. Okay. So it's a fantastic cartoon.
We were cheated by only getting 2 seasons of that.
Incredibly. But it's super clear that cartoon was literally nothing more than advertising for the movies. Like the entire cost of that cartoon was done because the revenue they were going to be pulling in from the movies. I mean, and I think the comic books are the same. So once the movie started generating crazy revenue, I have a feeling that a lot of these things may have been, in terms of where they're allocating their costs and how the financial analysts are doing the amortization of all the costs for these things. I got a feeling a lot of this is translated, or some portion, as marketing for the movies. Because they keep trying to chase billion-dollar movies, and once they hit, I mean, for a while it was one after another after another. Anyway, I might be wrong. That's my 2 cents.
If I may,
again for a second,
you're not wrong.
Prowlers and Paragons Ultimate Edition right now, this moment as we're speaking. Shoot me an email at MikeLaugh@gmail.com. Hey, it's a telethon. I'm doing telethon thing.
Right.
I noticed.
I'm not giving away canvas bags. Be happy about that. Shoot me an email.
Where's my swag bag? Come on.
Yeah, there you go. It's in the mail, sir. A Mountie and a Moose will deliver it to you in 2 weeks. Shoot me an email at MikeLaugh@gmail.com with Prowlers and the Paragon. Prowlers in the subject line. Sorry. To be entered in that drawing. Thank you very much. Alex, you've been very quiet, sir. As a line developer for M&M, do you ever think about how can I tap into the popularity or the recent popularity of superhero movies with my products, or do you focus more on just the RPG market, really?
I think about it all the time because I began enjoying superheroes because of like the Justice League Unlimited cartoon. That was my introduction to superheroes, was the Timverse, and it's been really interesting seeing the cycle of, hey, that thing I really like is back now with the new Cape Crusader show on Amazon. So it's always on my mind. What can we be doing to try to capture some of that, what the people will like about superheroes these days? But it's been, I don't know, it's hard to nail down exactly. It's hard to nail down what people are into, like why they like a certain thing. Because I don't want to be the person who is like, they like this thing, so I'm going to make more of this thing without really understanding why. Like, I don't want to be the executive who saw that Barbie made $1 billion and they're like, hungry hippos now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, having spent time in the film industry, that's exactly what's going on, by the way.
Yeah.
They're literally sitting around having conversation about how can we make a Connect 4 movie? Like, it's happening.
Yeah, which is insane. That's not the message. I don't understand how people get the wrong message. But
I do think one of the challenges with getting into what people like about superheroes for RPGs is that people like different things. And one of the challenges, at least in my experience, about superheroes as a genre is that it tends to have one of the widest ranges of expectations to it in terms of its audience. And you can get some really wild tone shifts if you're not all on the same page about what your superhero story or adventure or game is supposed to be about. And I think that can really be one of the challenges of getting people into a superhero game is oftentimes it's either the game does not meet their expectations, or they don't know what their expectations are, or they aren't very clear on what this game is supposed to be like. Because there's a lot of superheroes out there.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that drives me insane in superhero games is anytime I pick up a superhero game and the intro tells me how you can just play like the comics, and I'm like, well, no, you can't. Because there isn't an editor on your side. There isn't, a writer there making sure everything goes tickety-boo, and at the last second, the hero has what they need. It's still a game. Yep. So approach it as a game set in a superhero milieu, and you'll do a lot better because people can play. And that's probably why Champions has held on for so long. It's probably why Mutants and Masterminds was such a large piece of the community for so long, because it wasn't trying to do that gimmicky thing. It was just saying, hey, make what you want. Here's a tool set. Go for it,
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I think one of the more popular superhero games recently is, and not necessarily RPGs, but is Sentinels of the Multiverse.
The card game?
Sentinels of the Multiverse, the card game.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because Sentinels married this very sort of rich comic-y setting that the creators obviously loved creating, with this very restrictive sort of gameplay because it's a card game. There's basically, just you're playing out certain scenarios, but there's only so many ways the game can play. It's not an RPG where your characters can just do whatever they want. You have cards, you have to play them. You have certain characters you can play, and that's it. And so in some ways, it narrows the focus because one of the challenges with superheroes is always, both as design and as game master, is anything could happen. They could do anything. Their powers could be anything. Their characters could potentially do anything. And of course, they often have these huge powers and player character mentalities that are they're the people in the audience who are just like, well, why don't I just shoot this guy with a kryptonite bullet?
Sad to say. What was that Call of Cthulhu game? Something Arkham
Horror?
Yeah, where you had like the thing at the top, and you had to go through the locations and then get to the
Arkham Horror. That's Arkham Horror.
Why no one made a superhero version of that, I will never understand. Here you go, buddies. Money on the table. For anyone who can afford to fucking produce that. Because I sure as fuck can't.
Didn't someone do a superhero Cthulhu crossover 10, 15 years ago?
Not a Cthulhu crossover. No, I'm saying take the concept of how the game is played. Here's your main villain at his headquarters at the top of the board. Here's all the events in the city that will get you to him depending on what path you take. And now you fight the big bad guy at the end. Fun for the whole family. We pack it up at the end of the night. We're done.
Yeah.
And that, folks, is what it looks like when someone gets the wrong message from something being popular. Oh, you mean add Cthulhu to it? No, that's
he did the thing.
But don't get me wrong. Adding
Cthulhu.
Don't get me wrong. Adding Cthulhu's to things is Cthulhu's plural is in fact one way people sometimes manage to make money. Right?
It is.
It's the Old West. No one cares about the Old West. What if we add Cthulian horror? Oh, well, that's at least interesting, right?
Yeah.
I think the Dora Explorer Cthulhu crossover was a bridge too far, but I do see your point.
Yeah, it's fair.
Cultist no culting.
Thank you. I was trying to make that joke, and I could not come up with that good a variant of that joke. No.
Got you.
Cultist no culting is absolutely the way to go with Dora the Explorer Cthulhu.
All right. Well, let me ask you this: we've had a plethora of licensed properties. In fact, you guys at Green Ronin did one. You're doing one for Valiant right now. You did one DC. Oh God, 10 years ago.
Yeah, really. 14 years ago, actually, almost.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean,
that's what got me into superhero role playing games. Was
Yeah.
DC Adventures.
If we go back and I mean, Phase Rip, it kind of towers over everything. Is this like that big monolith in 2001? And that was basically just trying to emulate Bronze Age Marvel. I mean, why has that so dominated the psyche of the player base? Well, there have been so many other licensed products that have come out since then.
Well,
Sorry, which one?
Face Rip, the
Face
original
Rip.
Marvel.
Marvel superheroes.
Yeah, Marvel superheroes.
I mean, Marvel
We're educated
superheroes.
men, gentlemen.
Marvel superheroes, amongst other things, had the advantage of not having the competition that superhero games have today.
Now, right?
I'm not enough of an expert to say that it was the first licensed comic book RPG, but I certainly can't think of one that came before it. So it hit hard because you could play Wolverine, or if you like the haircut and claws but prefer a opera cloak, you could play Owl. Point is, it gave you a ton of things you could do easily that was hard to do in other games. Face Rip specifically made it easy. If you had adamantine claws, you could just have the power claws. If you regenerated, it just had the power regeneration. And it did not really bother with rules to make things that weren't Marvel characters, because it was there to make Marvel characters. So,
Yeah.
But at the same time, and this is anecdotally, that may have been the case in a lot of the States, but in Canada, everyone played Champions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you played, hey, we're going to play Marvel Superheroes, they're like, why do you want to play that baby game with the colored chart? And they wanted to do their 700-point, mega puke fucking vegetable telepath in a iron lung, like that's what they wanted to do. So it depends on where you were. I remember Jeff Grubb was explaining this to me at one point when we were talking about how there was this line. Everybody in the East was playing Champions, I think it was, and everybody in the West, Villains and Vigilantes was the more popular game.
Mm-hmm.
Or the inverse. Thank you, Len. And that whole point is something that's got to be taken into consideration. You can say that it had no competition, but V&V was huge. It was my first superhero game.
It was my first
Champions
superhero
was-
game too.
But it
And
had no
Champions was
competition
massive.
among licensed,
Yeah,
recognizable.
there was. There was
For
also
sure.
DC
Sure.
Heroes from Mayfair, which never blew up as big because
Sure.
sadly it just was never going to be as big as Marvel was, because Marvel's always been bigger than DC since, the late 70s. It's just the way it is, right?
Circling back though to Marvel, it really, I think, you can't argue with the difference in competition it had back then versus what we have now. But apart from that, it was a brilliant design
Mhm.
in its own right.
yeah,
It was a
Absolutely.
brilliant design that took simulationism and kind of chucked it out the window at a time when simulationism was still kind of the word of the day. It was a brilliant design just from the perspective of the visuals of it. Like the rules that they elected to use facilitated these very bright, pretty streetlight white, green, yellow, red colors that went right hand in hand. And remember, this was a time the insides were all black and white, but the exterior was very pretty colors in the front, and this back you had this very pretty color chart. So there was this visual candy coating appeal to the whole thing. You wrap all of that together and move forward to nowadays, and you wrap it in a beautiful nostalgia bow, which is very potent. There's many reasons for its staying power, including the fact that you can now get everything for it for free online.
Yeah. Well,
Even
that's
Just one
Even in
second.
that regard. Sorry, go ahead.
Congratulations, Nathan Berg. You have won a copy of Prowlers and Paragons. Please email me with the email you use at RPG. And,
Feel free to
Right
contact me if you
now.
have any questions.
that kind of touches on Owen's earlier point too about competition. Is one of the other things is the difference between when Marvel superheroes first came out and the present day is not only are new RPGs competing with everything that's on the market now, but everything that's been on the market in the last 30 years. Because it's not like these games stop working or go away. And many of them are still technically available in one form or another. Like Len says, you can download the entire, library of Marvel superheroes off of a website. There's a whole ton of options out there these days.
Yeah.
To that point, I'm trying to find out if I can remake Super Babes.
Oh, speaking of which, also the first licensed superhero RPG, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it is.
Super Babes.
Super big.
Well, you know what? You do that good girl art, baby.
All right. Right now, I'm giving away a copy of Mutants and Masterminds Deluxe Heroes Handbook. Please email me with M&M or Marshall Mathers, if you prefer, in the subject line at mikelaughed@gmail.com, and we will send you a copy of that. Also, the link is tinyurl.com/OwenFunds. Go. $5 helps.
Yes.
Help our buddy Owen.
Yes.
Okay.
I have nothing to give you to give away tonight. Sorry.
So what?
It is absolutely true that every tiny little bit helps, and I have had huge support from the gaming industry, and I appreciate it deeply to a embarrassing level. So, embarrass me.
Mike, can I have the floor for a quick second then, please?
The floor is yours, Senator.
Thank you. Hey, Z-Nuts, I know you're all watching because we're simulcasting right now, and you're all out there, and we talk about being heroic, be heroic tonight. Head down to tinyurl.com/OwenFunds. Go on, throw $1, throw $5, throw $10. I've thrown my piece in. I want you guys to throw your piece in. We are going to do what we say. We're going to be heroic tonight, and we're going to help Owen out. So get her done, Z-Nuts. I'm counting on you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Bear.
Steve made me think about another thing when talking about what competition Marvel RPG had, Marvel superheroes, and that is that there were fewer ways to play with Marvel at the time.
Yes.
If I want to play Marvel right now, there are games on my cell phone I can play, games on my laptop. There are movies that I can download. The ability to interact with the Marvel characters or play as a Marvel character is much broader than it was at the time when, there's the occasional board game here and there, etc. But the main way to pretend to be a Marvel character, other than to draw terrible comics on your own three-hole punch lined notebook paper in high school, was to play Marvel superheroes. And I think that all tabletop RPGs, in fact, have a certain amount of that interactivity question, right? When I was first getting into tabletop RPGs at all, if I wanted to pretend to be a hero, my options were basically some tabletop RPG or like Temple of Apshai, very 8-bit on the Commodore 64. I did not have World of Warcraft or any of the many popular, many awesome video games. I did not have nearly as many movies to look at. I was just doing a list of my personal rankings of fantasy movies from the 80s. That is not as big a list.
Not a long list.
Mine's huge.
It's like 36 entries long, and that was with a fair number of provisos. Like, I didn't allow anything that had a modern element, so I was throwing out The Princess Bride, which otherwise would be very near the top of that list. But as Steve was saying, not only do people that get into it now have all the movies that were made this decade and all the movies last decade, but with streaming, it's easier and easier and easier. I can go watch Deathstalker 2 right now if I wanted to. And unlike all the rest of the Deathstalkers, I might want to.
Now, Owen, the question is, Owen, you've said nothing slightly modern. Does that disqualify your Hunter of the Future?
I was going to say your Hunter. Oh, my God.
So I didn't say nothing slightly modern. I said nothing with modern scenes. So I'm allowing some sci-fi stuff.
Okay.
Right? So your has sci-fi. Krull has sci-fi elements.
Yes, it
so
does.
If it is primarily historic with some sci-fi elements, I allow it. Neverending Story has modern scenes, which therefore I did that. Labyrinth, Princess Bride, I kicked all of them out. And I kicked some of them out because I thought when ordering these things, having as narrow a list as possible would help me with not doing too many apples to oranges comparisons. Right? Like I specifically said, if I consider something to primarily be a different genre, I can make the case that Empire Strikes Back is a fantasy, but it is primarily a sci-fi movie. A lot of wushu films are sure as heck fantasy, and there were a bunch of them in the 80s, but I primarily consider them wushu.
Thank you for pronouncing that term properly. As a martial artist, you touched my heart. Thank you. Thank you. If I hear one more person say Wuxia, I'm just going to vomit.
You can at least partially thank Green Ronin and Chris Rabus for that.
Indeed.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
But you're welcome. You know what? Go on. I had an idea. It died, and we're going to let it stay dead.
Fair enough.
So I had to do for Heroic, I had to do my Appendix N, which is all the stuff, movies, comics, and TV shows that inspire Heroic and the Bronze Age. Jesus Christ, at one point in time, I just had to start putting series of movies in because with all the DC animated stuff, I was just like, DC animated, DCAU, just all of it. Just,
Right,
I don't care.
Just watch it all.
Just watch it all. I don't care. You'll get something out of it. Have fun. You know?
The DC animated stuff was by far even though I am a same age as you and I grew up with the same comics and they are absolutely influential. I got to be honest, the DC animated stuff probably was top of my mind on working on P&P, even above the stuff that I grew up with.
But we are of the age where we understand. We are of the age where we understand that a man with wings can do anything. A man with a rocket can do everything. Come on, 60s Spider-Man is still the best. Come on, the Rhino steals a bunch of gold to build a statue of himself in the sewer. Why? Why in the sewer? I don't fucking know.
Who cares?
I think one of the reasons the DCAU works so well is something that I think has actually helped a lot of the movie series, although not necessarily the DC movie series, in that they knew that they had a limited amount of space for their continuity, right?
Yeah.
So they can't do absolutely every story that has ever been done about DC. So they've got to pick not only what stories do we want to tell, but how do we make these stories make sense together?
Right. How do we make them accessible as well? Yeah.
Well, X-Men '97 did that really well.
Yeah, it did, absolutely.
I do not like '90s X-Men cartoon. Didn't care for it. Wasn't my cup of tea. X-Men '97 blew me away.
Yep.
How well they were just taking these stories and weaving them together and just making something amazing out of them. So yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jacob was a big fan. He especially liked Gambit on that show. Hey, Paul Pappas, congratulations. You have won the copy of Mutants and Mastermind. Please email me with your DTR and we'll send that to you.
Honestly,
please.
It has
don't
long
take
been,
advantage of my muted microphone to say things like that, Mike.
Forgive me, sir. Forgive me.
It has long been my feeling that that animation is actually the best moving media for superheroes.
Yep, agreed. My Hero Academia, I tell my players, this is a power stunt crash course. Mm-hmm. If you want to know how to power stunt your powers in Marvel, watch My Hero Academia, because that's what the entire show is about. Is about figuring out a way to use your powers all of a sudden to tip the scales. You know, it's great stuff.
Speaking of storylines, one of the things that the Young Justice series was amazing.
Indeed.
Since G.M. Josie mentions it. No, it was fantastic. And for many of the same reasons, right? They had a specific set of stories. They had a different focus, but they still were weaving other things around them.
Yep.
One of the things that I think sometimes people that make superhero RPGs do, I'm sure they often do, is to specifically go out to make pastiches where someone says, oh, that's this setting's Superman type. Oh, that is this setting's Cyclops type. I want to call out Jacob in particular because he does the Superpowered Legends line. I am not unbiased. I'm the publisher. But he has specifically set out to make his own pastiche superhero world where he's taking the characters that he likes and weaving them into a single cohesive timeline that, for one thing, does not have to pretend that, for instance, one of the characters has been 16 for 40 years.
Right.
Pick a time, cover it, move forward, but it also means that he can weave these characters together. He actually inspired me. One of my very early comic loves was the Marvel Godzilla series, because I really liked Godzilla versus S.H.I.E.L.D. as a concept. I thought it was sort of a perfect, hey, here's something at a superhero, supervillain level that is not a classic superhero or supervillain. If there was a group like S.H.I.E.L.D., surely they would be super concerned about
Godzilla
and other kaiju. And I actually recently on my blog, which you can go to owen.com and it'll boot you over to Patreon where stuff currently is, I did what I was calling the K-Force files, which was me trying to take all the things I loved about kaiju and boil them down into one cohesive timeline. because Godzilla even does not have one cohesive timeline, not even close. But you can watch them and you can be like, oh, I really love the elements of this Godzilla movie. Like, I like the fact that there's a G-force that specifically goes after them, and there's a psychic institute. But this movie itself is, as a movie, kind of terrible. So I can take those elements I like and then blend them in with either a more restrained or whatever it is you want to do with kaiju. I think that's one of the big appeals to some people for superhero RPGs, is be able to craft a world that they and other players can interact with, where you can say, hey, here's our timeline, here's our set of heroes, here is how we deal with certain questions. I think anyone that writes Batman has to answer the question, why doesn't Batman kill the Joker? And the answer can be, Batman isn't willing to kill anyone he's not an executioner. And if that's the answer, then you have to stick with that, be consistent, not have him make an exception to kill someone else. But then you're like, well, if he's willing to kill them, why the heck is he
not the
willing
Joker?
to kill the Joker, right? There are lots of ways you can answer that question, but I think you have to answer it, and once you answer it, be consistent with it. And I think that's one of the places where people that enjoy superhero RPGs, one subset of them, sort of the world builders of them, really like to play with that.
Oh, and I think... Sorry, go ahead.
Steve. No, Steve, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one of the... Along those lines, I think one of the greatest influences on superhero RPGs was the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, because it was that world-building impulse condensed into that, just giant collection of, essentially baseball stats, that comic readers just went nuts over. And, to the point where DC was compelled to, do their Who's Who, series to compete with it. Because it was just that codifying of all that detail and all of these little bits of pieces of information. And I remember, for me as a comic book reader, I was mining back issue bins for years because I was like, I want to track down this guy, and what about this story they reference here? I got to find that, and all of that stuff.
Well, and that grew out of Contest of Champions, right? Because at the end, the appendix of each issue of Contest of Champions had just breakdowns of Marvel characters for you as little. And I remember hearing the story that the whole idea of the handbook was like a throwaway. We need something to fill the schedule, and someone said, "Well, why don't we do this?" And they went, "All right, we'll do that." Man.
It was an internal document that Grunwald had originally proposed for the editorial staff at Marvel. They could keep things consistent, and then they were like, "Hey, we could publish this."
There's a gap in the schedule. Let's stick it in.
Did you say money?
But this is the fun thing. Like when you talk to one of the things I've loved. Like, there is no one who has been more of an influence on my design than Jeff Grubb, just from the conversations I've had to have with him on my podcast and on my YouTube channel. And he talks about how when they were doing Marvel and all the input they'd get from they could literally call up Marvel and say, "Hey, we need some art to go in this space that's like this. You got anything?" And they'd be like, and if they didn't have anything in the archive, they'd just grab someone from the bullpen and make them draw it real fast for them.
Right.
We'll never see that level of commiseration. Like I've talked with Matt about what he's done on his current one, and it's like Marvel, even though they're publishing it, hasn't given them that level of support, compared to what they got back in the 80s, thereby proving once again for all my viewers who know me well, the 80s greatest decade that ever happened. Suck it.
Hey, Mike. Ronald Reagan smiles.
I missed the whole thing.
Can I interject one thing?
Sure.
So I see that we're getting to the icons giveaway. And I just wanted to note for all of you who are watching, if you happen to have a copy of the assembled icons and you want to enter the giveaway anyway, I will get you whatever other ad infinitum PDF product you want. If you already have this and you want something else, we can work something out. So feel free to enter regardless. And please do
deal, folks.
Go to the URL and kick in what you can.
All right, fine. I'm giving away a hug. If you email mike@laugh@gmail.com and you put hug in the title, if I see you at a con and you're there, you get a hug.
It's a literal bear hug.
Literal
bear hug. Nice.
Will you help hoist me up and crack my upper back? Because I really enjoy that.
I'll do something to you, boy. You've learned a lot of Kraken from me with your little Canadian jokes over the years, my friend.
Release the Kraken. I got a question for Alex and Steve. We had a commenter asking, why hasn't Bowman just killed Omega? I think we're all wondering to know about that.
Well, you know, Bowman's got a code. He doesn't want to kill anybody.
And he does have that one secret arrow from that strange misadventure that supposedly, according to legend, can destroy any one target that he chooses. But how does he choose that target?
Yeah, wait until Smog attacks.
Right.
Well, you know, you never know when the greater threat is going to come along.
Bowman is a player character. He will never use an RPG until the end of the game, and he realizes he has all that ammo.
Gentlemen, I hate to be that guy, but I have somewhere else to be, so I've got to bounce. I gave Mike an hour, and that's my hour, Mike. Sorry, buddy.
Thank you.
Lovely being on panel with you all. Owen, best of luck with everything,
Pleasure.
and hopefully the Xenuts are going to come out and do a little bit of damage to that goal for you. And Len, you know.
Hey,
Steve,
I love you, baby,
again.
and I want to thank you for not offering those pictures you have of me. So thanks.
Got it. Someone has to protect the goats. Steve, take care. Jacob, take care. Alex, lovely meeting you. And Mike, you know what you did. You know.
I know.
All right. Bye-bye.
That was Andrew Collas, folks, a.k.a. Bear, the Gen X GM. Thanks for joining us, Bear. Once again, I'm going to say go to tinyurl.com/OwenFunds. Kick in $5, $10, $15, whatever you can spare. Every little bit helps. That's kind of the point of all this, folks. Please,
Yes,
tinyurl.com/OwenFunds and help out our pal Owen. So
that is the hour. Do you want to keep going, Mike, or do we need to wrap?
Well, we can go for just a few more minutes if you guys want to. I know Jacob has just about finished up his drawing, and this is looking pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah,
Very
Jacob.
cool.
Jacob,
Jacob always
and
makes
for that
it
matter,
cool.
my friend Stan's interpretations of me always look so much better than reality, which is, of course, half the point of comic book art. So,
Very nice. Well, if we're moving in the direction of wrapping up, then if I could volunteer for just one moment, and I just want to say that I am overwhelmed with joy and very proud of myself for not just fanboying out completely, being here speaking with both Owen and Steve, because I'm a huge fan of both you guys. So I think I've been pretty cool. At no point have I ripped off my shirt or anything. So I'm fairly proud of myself for that. And I just, on a personal level, want to thank you both because you have both directly given me hours of joy, frankly. And thank you for that. And inspiration for my own RPG writing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Len. So
Appreciate
speaking,
it.
we're back on the subject of inspiration. Apart from us, what were some of your inspirations when you were working on Prowlers and Paragons?
For me, the two different things, inspiration and motivation, right? The inspiration was clearly, first and foremost, actually, just what I mentioned before, the DC cartoons, for sure, were the primary inspiration. The love of superheroes, as Bear mentioned, came from those tremendous comic books of the 80s, the Frank Miller Daredevil run, the Perez Teen Titans, the Claremont Byrne X-Men, etc. The motivation was that Shane Hensley and Clint Black basically took me out behind an alley and just beat me senseless. And I mean, they may not realize they did it, but I was working on a generic RPG for quite a long time. And I was nearing its completion. It had actually even went through a period of being stolen from my car, where it was so long ago that I had discs and papers in my car, and my car got robbed, and it was all gone. So I literally had to recreate it all, which was awesome. But then it was kind of sort of nearing somewhat finishing up. And then I saw this book on the shelf, Savage Worlds. What is this? And I looked through it and I'm like, well, I guess I don't need to release my generic RPG anymore. So I cried for about 3 days, and then I had this system left over. I'm like, well, now what I'm going to do? And that was there cooking and percolating, and then eventually became. So the motivation was to do something with this system, and I ended up buffing and polishing it and turning it into a Supers game.
Nice. What's your favorite game mechanic from it?
Dice pool that's not too large. I have this weird thing when I design. When I'm trying to design something, my idea is, within reason, I want the player to feel something like what the character is feeling. So it's funny, I just had this conversation on a different interview like a week ago, but like, for example, if you have a meta currency, right? If you can just decide to spend it ahead of time, that creates a different, if you have to determine, you have to spend it ahead of time, right? You have to choose before you roll.
Yep.
That creates a different feeling than if you're allowed to spend it after you roll.
Yes.
And the choice of which rule to use depends on what feeling you want the player to have while playing your game. Okay, so with that concept in mind, I liked the idea of a dice pool where you roll a bunch of dice, but not where you roll so many that you suddenly, rolling a bunch of dice feels powerful, but if it's too many dice, you suddenly feel weak again once those dice hit the table. Because you go from being ha-ha to, okay, now it's 1, 3, 7, 4, 5. So there's like, you go from being cool hero to an accountant. Not that there's anything wrong with accountants. They're very, very, very important. My father was an accountant. But you
there's solid people in the backbone of the country.
So just out of curiosity, what is the ideal dice pool size?
For me, for supers, between 6 and 12 D6s.
Okay.
D6, the king of all dice.
Of course.
But that's an excellent question, by the way, in terms of, I mean, for you obviously were there for M&M, and then you're like, okay, now I want to do more icons.
Yep.
Which I consumed again, having consumed everything you've ever done. So, but what's your favorite mechanic in M&M, which had certain restrictions? And then what's your favorite? You're like, no, I want to have some more freedom to do what I want with icons. Like, compare and contrast those two.
So my favorite game mechanic for Mutants and Masterminds is hero points, and the various things you can do with them and all of that. And like you said, the ways you can use them as a meta currency in the game, and particularly the way they interact with complications in the game, and encourage players to lean into, sort of superhero melodrama and, even their character's own failures. The thing, I honestly say the mechanic I like most in icons is the random character generation, which is one of the things I designed icons for, was the, hey, let's roll up characters experience that you can't, we've since addressed it, so there is sort of a random character generator for Mutants and Masterminds, but at the time there wasn't, and it was very, crafting a character. And I wanted to do a superhero thing that was like, let's just roll up characters. And I especially just had very fond recollections of Villains and Vigilantes was my first superhero RPG. And my friends and I in middle school, just like, rolling up tons of these random superhero characters, and I liked the creative space that comes from, here's a bunch of random elements, make a coherent superhero out of these. It's sort of the sort of Top Chef, Iron Chef, superhero challenge. Here are your random ingredients, make a superhero out of this. And it's always fun to do that, and it's fascinating for me because I've run tons of icon demos at conventions and things like that, and I always, if I can, have people roll up characters at the table, because that's a big part of the game, and it's always fascinating to see people really get into that process and just get really creative when it comes to who their character is.
That's excellent. That's
Steve,
absolutely.
how have we never done Iron Chef as a concept for a Mutants and Masterminds Monday?
I know, right? We totally should.
so I mostly played Champions as my early superhero experience. Some Marvel superhero, but I always liked the fact that there was a random generator for villains and vigilantes.
Yeah, me too.
And it was not unknown, especially when I needed villains and I was short on inspiration, for me to roll up a villains and vigilantes character and then write him up in Champions.
Mm-hmm.
What we mostly played was Champions, and Champions can handle nearly anything, especially if, when I'm talking about second edition Champions, right, with all the expansion books.
I was going to say my favorite Champion story, which is not mine, is Ken Height's essay in the anniversary edition of Champions, I think, where Ken proudly explains that he has played Champions for years and never personally created a Champions character because he has that friend, you know, and you all know him. He's that friend who just says, no, you're going to do it wrong. Just tell me what you want. I'll create it for you.
But see, I never imposed that on anyone, but especially since part of my early freelancing brand was that I would handle the crunch. Right? More than once, I was hired for a D20 game where someone was like, hey, we've got this really cool adventure, and we have no idea how to write up any of the monster stats. So I would sit there and go, okay, well, here are the monster stats, and by the way, you need treasure, et cetera, et cetera. So it is not unusual for my friends in my close gaming groups to say, hey, Owen, will you write up my character for me? And, you know, I wrote up Champions characters for fun. I wrote up more Champions characters than I ever played. And frequently, when I was being a GM for Champions, half the things you were dealing with were ideas I had for player characters that I never got to. But also, you had mentioned earlier the Marvel Handbook and the DC 2. Early in my Champions days, it was not. It was standard with multiple game groups I was in to have, here's a Champions book, and then here are all the individual Marvel Handbook entries, and here are all the individual DC entries, so that if a new person came into the group and they're like, well, you already have Superman and Cyclops and Wolverine and Batman, who is also Moon Knight, you know, what am I supposed to play? And you could go, oh, here, there will be a character in here that no one has played in this game.
Yep.
And at one point, it became standard to literally flip through those books randomly and point to one Marvel character and one DC character and combine those, which the randomness of villains and vigilantes. And, you know, we did end up at one point with, okay, you're Hawkman, but with Cyclops' eye beams. Wait, I think you're Birdman. I think that's what we just accidentally
that's just what we just created.
You know, in talking about this kind of stuff, I always go back to, it seems so clear. I can see fantasy games competing with one another fairly aggressively for similar spaces, but there is so much space in the realm of superhero RPGs. Like, I could, how do I describe this? I could sit down to play Champions, and then the next day sit down to play Icons, and then the next day sit down to play Prowlers and Paragons, and then the next day sit down to play Mutants and Masterminds. And by the way, then the next day sit down to play Masks.
Sure.
And those are 5 entirely different gaming experiences that all just happen to involve people with powers and criminals.
Yep.
But they're entirely different experiences. And all of that, I think, Steve, you mentioned this very early in the conversation, falls within the possible world of ways to have fun with the superhero genre.
Yeah, indeed.
Much more so than I think you see with the fantasy genre, for example, or with like espionage.
More than espionage, I would push back on more than the fantasy genre, because there's a lot of different kind of fantasy out there.
There is.
There absolutely is in terms of the kind of fantasy, but, and don't get me wrong, it is an enormous spectrum for sure. But when, you know, as Steve touched on at the outset, when you say we're going to sit down and play a superhero game, one person may be thinking, we're basically playing a soap opera where I'm going to, you know, the push and pull here is going to be about me not letting Aunt May know that I have powers and whatever. And someone else is thinking, oh my God, this is going to be the coolest tactical battle game because everybody has different powers and whatever. And somebody else may be thinking of more sort of traditional, like this is going to be like a Champions game where I'm going to be able to sit down and Excel spreadsheet exactly the character I want. And somebody else may be thinking about, let me see what kind of random lunacy I get and let's roll. This is going to be, and all of that falls under, that's the sort of diversity of play that I don't know players have that broad a series of expectations when they're sitting down to play fantasy. And maybe that's simply because D&D is so, Dungeons and Dragons is such an looming presence that when you say fantasy, there's some assumptions that come with it.
I think there are assumptions that come with it for people who are pretty well mired in the popular end of fantasy RPGs. But I can sit down and play D&D one day, and then Blades in the Dark the next day, and then L5R or Seven Seas the next day, and get totally different experiences from games that are trying to give me totally different feelings.
Absolutely.
And I think that there is definitely a group of people who, and they're frequently the people on social media who keep saying, don't try and make everything D&D. Stop it. There are other games out there. But
it's me on people. Stop putting everything in a square peg.
Right.
But I do think that probably the group of fantasy players who have those different expectations, or maybe perhaps we should say different hopes, is probably as large as the group of people who are interested in playing super RPGs at all. It just doesn't feel like it, because when it comes to fantasy, that group is then, again, totally dwarfed by the people who just want to play whatever the most recent edition of D&D is.
Yeah.
I could easily believe that. Yep.
Fair.
And let us all behold that beautiful drawing Jacob has just finished.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you.
That's really cool. Thank you, Jacob.
One of the things I appreciate as a human of size is that is clearly an overweight heroic character, and that's just not something you see very often.
Well, it's especially sad because no one reads Buck Godot.
Right? And Buck Godot is one of the few people I could cosplay, right? And if I did, I would probably end up trying to put two-way radios in each of my guns and have my wife do the voices for my guns, but only when I wasn't looking. But that's a great piece, and
it
I
is
very much.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you.
So are you gonna do a Superpowered Legends on that? Now that you got the art,
I could easily do that. Yeah. Yeah. I'll just need to fill in a good role for the character. There's
Adam Strange.
I've already done a Star-Lord.
Adam Strange.
I was going to say Star-Lord or Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Rocket Raccoon.
Owen Casey Rogers.
Rocket Raccoon would not be a bad niche to stick them in, even if it's very different in expectation.
Right.
Yeah. Well, hey,
Len, I just wanted to say that that fanboy feeling of working with Steve, I work with Steve every day, and that never goes away.
Yeah, I have more than once said Steve is who I would like to be when I grow up. So
I'm holding out for Beyonce, but Steve is number 2.
That's
entirely fair.
legit. Yeah, absolutely.
That's entirely fair.
Hey guys, appreciate you coming out. Thanks to everyone who jumped into the giveaways. Thanks to everyone who donated.
Yes.
And please, one last time, tinyurl.com/Owen funds. If you're listening to this after the broadcast, go donate, kick in wherever you can. Every little bit helps. Please help our friend Owen.
And obviously, my deepest gratitude to everyone here. I appreciate you spending your time on this. And to everyone who has, even whether or not you, obviously my deepest gratitude to anyone who donates, but also just sharing those URLs around.
Yes.
Social media tends to choke down on anything that is not a paid advertisement that looks like someone's trying to make money on it. So even just sharing those around and, saying, hey, here's a thing. If you are so moved, go look at that and donate. That's also a huge help. And I appreciate. Thank you. Owen is always for sale. That's why I'm a freelancer.
I think he was saying, Do you want to clarify? Do you want to buy the art, or do you?
We'll put him in touch, Jacob. You'll figure out how to get his money.
Yeah.
Right.
So the whole gaming industry has been hugely supportive of me in what has been a difficult year and a half now, and I appreciate it more than I can properly express.
Owen, you are one of the greatest people who've ever done this job that we do.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Casey, email me at mikelaugh@gmail.com, and we'll work out a deal. If you want to buy that picture, we will make sure all those proceeds go to Owen's GoFundMe. So hit me up, man. And on that happy note, what to call it a show.
All right.
Len, Alex, Owen, Steve, Jacob, thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for having us.
Happy
And
to.
Pleasure.
thanks to all of our viewers and donators and commenters. And let's rent Owen at reasonable prices.
In fact, freelancing can easily be described as having yourself be rented to someone. So yeah,
Yes.
I have freelanced as little as 10 words before at surprisingly reasonable rates. So, anyone who wants to get a hold of me, you can do so at owen.stevens@gmail.com. If you want to give me money for almost any reason. Every time that meme goes around, warm cookies, warmed in our Owen. Look, a gig's a gig, right? So,
Right.
let me know what you want, and I will work it out.
All right.
Reminds me of my college days. I'm sorry. No, never mind.
And we'll see you next time on the BAMF podcast.